It was weird. He wasn't responding to anything.
We were told there's pretty much nothing we could do. The damage had been done.
The doctor said, I've never seen anything like that.
I asked her, is this serious? And she said to me, we need this to be taken care of right away.
Why her? Why not me?
We didn't want to find out the diagnosis at the autopsy.
Next, two medical mysteries that defied the experts. 5-month-old Carson Colt seems like a healthy baby in every way, until his parents experience what can only be described as the shock of their lives.
I couldn't believe it. Horrifying is a perfect word.
It was probably one of the scariest things I ever saw, and his tongue was just bleeding and bleeding.
Then, when Cindy Weber notices a bruise on her leg, she doesn't think much of it, until it mysteriously begins to reappear again and again and again.
I was in excruciating pain. It felt as if my body was surrendering to this disease.
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery.
In the fall of 1988, Jeff Colt was a college freshman in Walla Walla, Washington, when he stepped into a local campus hangout and experienced what can only be described as love at first sight.
I saw a beautiful woman and figured I'd try and get a date.
Her name was Dina Hernandez, also a freshman, and she was just as smitten.
He had these big blue eyes, you know, blonde hair, and he had this cowboy hat on, and it was those eyes that I fell in love with at first.
Jeff and Dina date for the next 4 years, and by the time graduation rolls around, they know they're ready to spend the rest of their lives together.
About a year after we got out of college, we got married.
It was a small wedding, just friends and family. It was just a very nice little ceremony.
Soon after, the young couple moves to Seattle. Dina lands a job as a fitness instructor, and Jeff works as a security guard while studying for his master's in education. But both are eager to start a family.
We started having thoughts about having children when, I was about 30 years old. I thought it would happen right away, and it didn't. A year went by, and I still wasn't pregnant.
Dina and Jeff are disappointed, but hoping for the best, they forge ahead and buy a new house with room for 3. Then, just a few months after moving in, they get the news they've been waiting for.
When I found out I was pregnant, it was very exciting. It was kind of scary because I was like, oh, okay, I am pregnant, so what's going to happen now?
Dina sails through the pregnancy, and on August 22nd, 2003, she goes into labor.
It was about 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning.
She's like, my water's breaking, we need to go. So we rushed down to the hospital. I can remember her grabbing my hand and digging her nails in. I made a comment like, hey, that kind of hurts. And she's like, you don't even know what hurts.
At 11:30 that night, after 20 hours of labor, their son enters the world.
When he finally came out, I was just relieved. Jeff started crying, and I started crying.
We named him Carson just because I wanted kind of a rugged name.
The baby weighs a healthy 8 pounds 3 ounces, and in the eyes of his thrilled parents, he seems perfect.
He was just a calm, happy little dude. They handed him to Mom and snuggled up, never cried, and I was like, sweet, we got a content little baby here,
2 days later, on a hot August evening, Jeff and Dina bring Carson home. But within just a few hours, their healthy baby seems to take a turn for the worse.
He was really fussy and he looked red in the face.
So I took his temperature, and it was about 101.
He was definitely running a fever, and we weren't sure if it's because of the temperature of the house, and we had him wrapped up.
And so I called Dr. Christopher's office, and they said to check his temperature all night. They did say it's a little warm outside, so kind of keep him, bundled, but take off some blankets and see if that's okay. He cooled down a little bit that night. He was probably about 99 before he went down.
But in the morning, Dina and Jeff are faced with a frightening new development.
I checked his temperature again, and he was about 102. And so I called the hospital. They said, you need to bring him back in.
I was scared. First thing you start thinking is, did the baby get sick on the way home? Did we do something wrong?
We were very scared.
We rushed down to the hospital, which was about a 15-minute ride.
The Colts pediatrician, Dr. David Christopher, meets them at the emergency room and wastes no time admitting Carson to the hospital.
A baby with a fever, we worry very much about infection, and it definitely could be a life-threatening situation for the baby.
They were concerned that his temp had spiked so much, and they put him in a special care nursery.
They wanted to rule out that Carson had any kind of infections.
We got a blood culture, and we also included a spinal tap to look for evidence of meningitis.
But while the hospital runs a battery of tests, a puzzling new pattern begins to emerge. Although the doctor is able to bring Carson's temperature down to 99 degrees, it doesn't stay down for long.
His body temperature fluctuated. He would overheat, so they would take everything off, and then he would get really cold. So his temperature would be about 97, and so then they would bundle him up again, and he would get a fever again.
24 hours later, the test results are in. But despite Carson's dramatic temperature fluctuations, they show absolutely nothing out of the ordinary.
And the doctors had no clue what was going on. We were there the whole time, packed in a small little room with the baby.
Finally, after an anxious week of waiting, Carson's mysterious spikes and dives in temperature begin to level off.
There was no evidence of infection. We elected to discharge him.
They had run every single test they could.
We felt pretty confident taking the baby home.
The Colts remain perplexed about what could have caused their newborn to take such a dramatic nosedive. But over the next few months, Carson thrives.
And he seemed real healthy. He was a big boy, and he was eating normal.
He was very happy. Still didn't cry a lot.
In fact, Carson is just beginning to roll over by himself when Jeff and Dina bring him to the doctor for his 3-month immunization shots.
They checked him out, did all the vitals, took his blood pressure, and everything was normal.
But as the nurse is administering the shots, everyone in the room notices something very strange.
The nurse couldn't believe that he wasn't crying with the needle going in him.
No reaction at all. It wasn't normal. He did not cry that whole time that he was with the nurse. He wasn't responding to anything.
We had no clue what to think.
In the spring of 2004, Cindy and Bruce Weber were only a few years away from celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary. But they were still very much in love.
Cindy and I met in a ceramics class at the University of Illinois.
He's my college sweetheart. I was a sophomore, and there was an attraction right away.
Cindy's my better half in the sense that she's very driven and she looks ahead a lot more than I do.
Over the years, Cindy's high energy has come in handy, raising 2 children, working as a kindergarten teacher, and sticking to a daily exercise regimen.
We were a very active family, and I loved to run, usually about 3 miles each and every day, and I loved to garden. I was an extremely healthy person. In fact, I was so healthy that I really rarely saw a doctor.
But then, one afternoon in March of that year, Cindy spots something unusual on her right leg.
At the end of the day, I noticed I had a 3 by 5 inch bruise on my leg. What was odd about that was I couldn't really put any specific thing to what would have caused such a large bruise.
We'd always joked that she bruised very easily, so it wasn't a surprise.
I wasn't too alarmed about that bruise. What was odd about it, though, was it was seeming to take a really long time to fade away. But then again, I really had never thought, how long does it take for a bruise to go away?
It takes a strangely long time, 2 months in fact, for the bruise to fade. And even after it does, Cindy's left with an odd sensation in her leg.
It still had the tenderness one would have with a bruise. I could always feel it, even when I couldn't see it. I did have a few friends who had had some serious illnesses, and I know that they had had some bruising.
Just to play it safe, Cindy makes an appointment with her family doctor.
So there I am explaining to the doctor, pointing to my leg, which looked totally normal. But I kept telling him, well, it still feels like a bruise. He said perhaps an MRI would be a good idea.
Sure enough, the MRI reveals inflammation deep in Cindy's leg tissue. A sign, the doctor says, that the original injury hasn't completely healed.
When he told me it was a deep tissue bruise, I felt a sense of relief.
So it seemed almost to be the end of the story.
The doctor advises Cindy to stop running and rest until the inflammation goes away.
They suggested that I just be patient, that I should stop and give it time to heal. I hated to stop running. It was my stress outlet, and it was something that I just enjoyed immensely.
Reluctantly, Cindy follows the doctor's orders. But 2 weeks later, not only is her leg still sore, but the bruise has returned.
It was very, very red and very blue. It was every bit as bold as the first time I had noticed it way back in March. This was very puzzling to me. So I made a call to the doctor. And the doctor told me to be patient. Maybe it just hadn't been enough time.
But as the weeks go by, a bizarre pattern sets in. The bruise mysteriously vanishes and reappears with no apparent warning.
It would come and go. I might not have it in the morning. I might have it at night. I might have it one day, and then not again for 3 or 4 more days, sometimes even a week. Sometimes it would just be very faint, barely visible, and sometimes it would be bolder.
Amazingly, a whole year later, there's still no let-up from the bizarre recurring bruise. But just as Cindy's resigned herself to living with it, she's blindsided by a frightening new symptom.
It was the end of May, and we were winding down the school year. The morning was fine. I didn't feel any different. And even at lunchtime, I didn't feel any different. An hour before the end of the school day, I felt a huge wave of pain come over me. I felt all fevery. Lifting my pencil felt as if I was lifting a 50-pound weight. And every mark that I made on the paper, I felt a wave of pain go through my arm. When I stood up, I realized it wasn't only my arms, but my legs were in extreme pain as well.
Somehow, Cindy manages to get through the rest of the day and drag herself home.
I was out of town on a business trip, and I got a call from Cindy, and she was crying that she was in so much pain.
I knew I just needed to get to bed as quickly as I could. I went upstairs, and it took me quite a while to get up the stairs because I was in such pain. I tried to put my pajamas on, and I realized I could barely lift my legs. It felt as if somebody was hitting me with jackhammers in my knees. I was just miserable.
At a routine checkup, 3-month-old Carson Colt stuns his parents and doctor when he shows absolutely no reaction to a series of painful immunization shots.
The doctor was pretty amazed that he wasn't screaming or yelling with a needle going in him.
But other than his mystifying indifference to the shots, Carson seems perfectly healthy.
We really couldn't isolate any particular reason why he would act the way he did.
He went through it like a breeze. No crying or complaining or anything.
At that time, he was a thriving boy. He was growing and gaining.
The Colts take Carson home, and his parents are delighted when, just a few weeks later, their son's first baby teeth begin to come in.
He wanted to chew on everything.
We thought, okay, well, he's teething. He was doing what a normal kid does.
And it's not long before Jeff and Dina notice an unusual-looking sore on his tongue.
He started to develop this little white, it almost looked like a white canker sore. That next week or so, it started getting bigger, and it didn't look good.
The tongue got really white, and we were really concerned.
Alarmed, Jeff and Dina take Carson back to see Dr. Christopher.
He had significant amount of inflammation, and we were really quite concerned that he had some significant damage to his tongue. I thought this was just a variant of teething.
He asked, has he been crying? Has he been cranky? And I'm like, no, he's been fine. And it hasn't affected him eating. A canker sore, it hurts, and he's fine. It didn't even bother him. We were asking him, is this normal? He's like, no, I've never seen this before.
The doctor believes the lesion is simply a result of their son rubbing his tongue against his teeth. But he assures the Colts that once Carson realizes it's causing him discomfort, he'll stop doing it, and the sore will heal on its own.
We tried to keep something in his mouth almost at all times, those little baby chew toys and stuff like that.
But it seemed like, he would get bored with that. It was very frustrating, and there was nothing we could do.
Dina and Jeff do their best to put their worries behind them, confident that Carson will simply outgrow the troubling habit. But nothing could have prepared them for what their 5-month-old does next.
I was feeding him baby food one time, and I think it was squash.
Jeff said, Dina, come here. And so I ran over, and then Jeff picked up something that was on the tray.
It looked like a piece of hamburger.
It was the tip of Carson's tongue. It was probably one of the scariest things I ever saw, and his tongue was just bleeding and bleeding. We didn't know what to do. We were just shocked. He did not even react to it.
No reaction at all. No watering of the eyes or no crying or anything. Horrifying is a perfect word.
Jeff and Dina race Carson to the hospital, where Dr. Christopher is on hand to examine him.
Quite a substantial amount of his tongue was gone on the right side. I think it might have been as long as half an inch and probably a 1/4 inch across.
We asked, is it going to heal? Is it going to grow back?
We were told there's pretty much nothing we could do. The damage had been done.
He seemed to be unaffected by his loss of part of his tongue. He was manifesting also some behaviors that we thought were a little bit unusual.
Dr. Christopher is baffled by Carson's bizarre injury. All he can do is send the Colts home with an ointment that will help the remaining part of their son's tongue heal. Horrified and confused, Dina and Jeff are left groping for answers.
We were just trying to figure out why he wasn't reacting to what he just did. That was a very scary thing for us. It was just unimaginable that he never cried.
I couldn't believe it. That must have really hurt. So, why isn't he crying?
Perplexed, yet thankful to be rid of the pain, Cindy returns to work the next day. But it isn't long before she finds herself grappling with an entirely new problem.
I noticed a little line of red dots. I thought it was pretty unusual. After I discovered these little bumps, I went to my mom's house. But I particularly like to go with my medical issues to her because she's a retired nurse practitioner.
And when Cindy's mother, Charlene, gets a glimpse of the strange dots, she's completely taken aback.
I said, that is a petechial rash, and it has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed immediately.
Petechiae are pinpoint-sized red dots caused by broken blood vessels under the skin's surface.
The only thing that I could think of is that people who have blood disorders get petechiae.
I could hear my mom's voice change its tone, and she doesn't always hide her emotions really well. She wasn't very calm about it. She said, you need to be seen now.
And I said, Cindy, please call a physician and do something about it immediately, which she did.
I was expecting that the doctor would know just what it was, but that wasn't what happened. When the doctor saw the rash, she was a little bit alarmed herself. I asked her, is this serious? And she said to me, we don't know what you have. We don't know if it's serious or not, but we need this to be taken care of right away.
They started talking about what it could be. There were diseases like leukemia or lupus.
The doctor performs a series of blood tests and a skin biopsy. And for the next 3 days, Cindy and her family wait anxiously for the findings.
The test results couldn't come back soon enough. It was getting so frustrating.
But when the report comes back from the lab, it reveals nothing out of the ordinary.
My family had a sense of hopelessness, that they couldn't do anything for me.
To make matters worse, Cindy's leg pains return with a vengeance. But they soon begin to radiate through her entire body. And just like the bruise, the episodes seem to come and go.
She'd get up in the morning and she'd feel great, and then, say, midday, she would start to feel achy again, and then at night it would get worse.
The pains became more severe, to the point where she was having a difficult time walking upstairs or moving around in her kitchen.
I was getting sicker and sicker by the day. I was hoping so much that it was just going to be some kind of a simple thing.
Determined to find out what's been making her so sick, Cindy visits one specialist after another.
I went to the regular doctor and an ENT, a rheumatologist, a dermatologist, and a neurologist. I kept thinking, well, maybe this will be the one that has the cure. Maybe this will be the one that knows what I have.
But none of the doctors can explain her seemingly unrelated symptoms or keep them from getting worse.
The pain got bad enough that she couldn't comfortably walk. She had to hang on to things in order to move around. Feet were really hypersensitive to anything. She felt like her feet were actually on fire sometimes.
By the middle of the summer, nearly 16 months since the bruise first appeared, Cindy is completely debilitated.
I could barely stand. I had such intense pain. I couldn't sleep. Even having the sheet on my feet was painful.
It was shocking to see how fast she could go from really healthy to really in just an agony.
I was so sick that I wasn't able to care for my family anymore. I couldn't stand, cook dinner, or do any of the things that moms normally do.
It was a devastating time for the whole family at this point.
I think it was maybe our darkest time. We didn't want to find out the diagnosis at the autopsy.
But when Carson turns 10 months old, he starts walking, and a disturbing new pattern begins to emerge.
He would fall on the floor. Sometimes he'd hit his head and he would just kind of get up and start to try to get up again. But he never screamed or anything like that.
One time he'd gotten away from me and his toe tripped. He went directly straight on the floor, hit his head, and popped up again and just took off. He never cried.
I didn't think it was normal, but it just seemed like he didn't react. I wanted an answer from somebody.
Determined to get to the bottom of Carson's puzzling case, Dr. Christopher goes back to square one.
We started looking at his history again, and we came up with some ideas that we felt needed further genetic evaluation.
Desperate to find out why their son keeps putting himself in danger, the Colts quickly set up an appointment with a genetics specialist at Children's Hospital in Seattle.
I wanted them to find out what he had and to tell me what I needed to do. In the genetics office, they looked him over, looked at his tongue, everything, and asked us questions about everything that had gone on with him.
The doctors suspect that there may be something seriously wrong with Carson's nerve fibers. But to confirm their hunch, they must first biopsy one of his nerves.
They scheduled a surgery with Carson to extract a nerve out of his leg down by the Achilles tendon.
It's a sensory nerve that if you biopsy it, is one of the standard tests that's done to look for diseases of nerve fibers.
As his parents wait anxiously, 12-month-old Carson is wheeled into surgery and put under anesthesia.
We wanted to know what he had, but I also wanted it to kind of come back and say he didn't have anything. But I knew there was something there. It was just a waiting game, very stressful. I just needed to know.
And then when they were done, they brought him into the room, and we stayed with him until he came awake. We got to go home after that.
One long week later, Dr. Christopher calls with the biopsy results and a shocking diagnosis.
Based on his symptoms, Carson was diagnosed with CIPA, which is congenital insensitivity to pain and anhidrosis.
CIPA, or congenital insensitivity to pain with anhidrosis, is an extremely rare disorder in which patients don't feel pain and can't sweat. In a healthy individual, unmyelinated nerve fibers send pain and temperature information to the brain. But in patients like Carson, these nerve fibers are not fully formed. As a result, he's incapable of feeling a pinprick or the agony associated with breaking a bone. In addition, he doesn't perspire, making it impossible for him to regulate his own temperature.
In that biopsy, they were looking for the presence of fibers that send messages from the area of sensation to the brain. They're all over the body. In Carson's case, they found that he had a dramatic drop in his unmyelinated fibers that serve your pain and temperature sensation. As a youngster, you will learn that if you touch a fire, you're burned, you won't touch it again. Carson doesn't learn that because there's no pain associated with him for him. He has all the apparatus there, but he doesn't have a way of transmitting that information to his brain.
When they told us, it was a shock. He could fall down, hurt himself, and we not even know he's bleeding internally.
But Carson's insensitivity to pain is just the half of it. Of even more concern to doctors is the fact that the 12-month-old is incapable of sweating.
When you're running, and your body senses that you're getting hot, you will start sweating. As a result of sweating, you cool down. That's a normal mechanism your body uses to protect your normal core temperature. And he's lost that ability. Our major concern would be succumbing to an event that would cause a high fever and seizures and subsequent death.
I was very scared. I didn't want him to have this. I was like, how is his life going to be? What's going to happen to him? I wish, he didn't have this condition.
For nearly 16 months, Cindy Weber has been suffering from a bizarre constellation of symptoms which have left her completely debilitated and in near constant pain. Over a dozen doctors have tried to find an explanation, to no avail.
It seemed as if each day this disease was taking over my body in a bigger, stronger way than the day before. I was beginning to wonder if I was going to win the war. It felt as if my body was surrendering to this disease.
Then, in June of 2005, Cindy goes to see her gynecologist for a routine checkup. But the visit turns out to be anything but routine.
The doctor seemed to be very concerned. I had rashes on me, and I could barely move.
The doctor performs a thorough exam, including a urinalysis, and discovers something alarming. Cindy has blood and a high level of protein in her urine, a common sign of kidney failure.
She decided that I should see a nephrologist as quickly as I could be seen. If my kidneys were involved, that may lead to a clue.
Just 12 hours later, Cindy is sitting in the office of kidney specialist Dr. Martin Kitaka.
She brought in all her medical records with her. When I saw Cindy's urinalysis results, and that in combination with her symptoms, I began to think that she had a systemic disorder. So I recommended to her that we do a biopsy of her kidney.
I was pretty concerned because my kidneys were involved now. Deep down, I was even wondering if this was going to be something that was life-threatening for me.
A few days later, Cindy undergoes the procedure she hopes will finally give her some answers.
It was a long weekend while we were waiting for those kidney biopsy results to come in. We were hoping so much that we were going to finally find out what was wrong with me.
First thing Monday morning, the nervous couple makes the 20-minute drive to Dr. Kitaka's office.
Dr. Kitaka came in. He told me that he knew what I had.
The biopsy showed that Cindy has a disease called microscopic polyangiitis.
Microscopic polyangiitis is a rare autoimmune disease in which white blood cells malfunction. In a healthy individual, the body produces white blood cells to help fight off infections. But in patients like Cindy, these same cells are defective and attack blood vessel walls throughout the body, causing severe inflammation.
We don't know exactly why this happens, but there's some trigger that makes your immune system go haywire.
Emotionally, I think having that diagnosis was very difficult for me. I had this rare disease. I had this disease that was not well understood by the medical community.
There was this new flood of questions.
But while the origins of the condition remain a mystery, Cindy's symptoms followed a well-documented trajectory. What one doctor thought was a deep tissue bruise was, in fact, the initial onset of the disease.
The bruising in Cindy was caused from inflammation of the small blood vessels within the skin. When that occurs, these blood vessels can rupture and cause leakage of blood into the tissue, and this can appear as a bruise.
As her disease progressed, Cindy's malfunctioning white blood cells continued to multiply and eat away at her blood vessel walls, resulting in debilitating pain.
When inflammation occurs in these blood vessels, that can cause leakage of blood into the tissue, but also narrowing of these blood vessels can occur, and that too can contribute to the muscle pains.
Dr. Kitaka goes on to explain that the petechiae that developed soon after Cindy's agonizing leg pain set in are classic signs of the disease.
There's inflammation in the small blood vessels within the skin, causing leakage of blood into the tissue, and that can show up as these skin abnormalities.
The disease is often unpredictable, but the manner in which Cindy's symptoms mysteriously appeared and disappeared doesn't surprise Dr. Kitaka at all.
Cindy's symptoms would wax and wane, and that's often the nature of this disease. And that's what makes it somewhat frustrating, because for periods of time you feel better and then you feel worse again.
But it was only a matter of time before the disease began to damage Cindy's kidneys, which explains her latest symptom, blood in her urine.
When inflammation develops in these blood vessels within the kidney, that can cause leakage of blood and protein into the urine. Her kidney function was still perfectly normal. So what we were seeing are just very early signs that the kidney is being affected.
Because I had good kidney function, they never thought to do the urinalysis.
It's now all too clear just how lucky Cindy was to have received her diagnosis before the disease did any further damage.
If Cindy had not been diagnosed, she could have developed kidney failure, respiratory problems, with bleeding into the lungs or through the GI tract.
The condition can also cause blood vessels in vital organs like the kidneys and lungs to burst, resulting in a fatal hemorrhage.
I was alarmed to find out that this disease can be quite serious.
12-month-old Carson Colt has just been diagnosed with SIPA, an extremely rare and dangerous condition that prevents him from feeling pain or maintaining a stable body temperature.
It was a relief that at least, I knew what it was, but yet it hurt because I knew that it was a condition that was genetic. It wasn't anything that can go away.
It's now clear that the fever and temperature fluctuations Carson experienced as a newborn were classic signs of SIPA.
These kids that have this particular syndrome usually begin, as Carson did, with temperature instability as an infant. If he's in an environment that's too hot, his body cannot respond by cooling with sweating.
And Carson's inability to feel pain explains what seemed, at the time, like a mysterious indifference to injury.
Children that have been seen with SIPA also have what appears to be lack of response to noxious stimuli, such as needles, such as IVs.
The teething injuries were also a direct result of SIPA, which deprived Carson of a critical warning system.
His ability to withdraw from something that's painful is diminished, and any kind of impact doesn't bother him in the least. As his tongue became abraded by his own tooth, he didn't seem to be upset by that, and even at one point he actually bit the edge of his tongue off. And And that was a strong sign that he just wasn't responding to pain in an ordinary way.
I can't imagine going through life without pain, because pain's there for you to know what your boundaries are.
He was at very high risk of causing damage to his, basically to his body. He may have fractures that aren't even picked up unless you see the swelling or inflammation.
With the diagnosis in hand, the Colts can't help but wonder why it took so long to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
It's extremely rare. I've never seen a case of this before. None of my colleagues had ever seen a case before.
When he was first diagnosed, we were told that it was like 200 cases in the world.
Unfortunately, there is no cure or treatment for SIPA.
Carson is much more at risk of damaging his joints and his bones. So it's prudent for us to try to prevent that. In addition, we have to be really careful about monitoring his temperature.
We just have to watch him a lot closer.
It requires a lot of patience on their part and a lot of understanding of where Carson is coming from, why he does what he does.
As Cindy struggles to grasp the gravity of her diagnosis, she can't help but wonder why Dr. Kataka was the only physician able to recognize the lethal disorder.
MPA is considered a rare disease. 1 out of 100,000 people will get this disorder. MPA affects multiple organs, but sometimes patients only present with one symptom. So until they develop a constellation of symptoms, it's sometimes hard to diagnose.
But even with a positive diagnosis in hand, the Webbers are devastated to learn that there is no definitive cure.
The fact that the disease I had was rare, was potentially life-threatening, that it didn't have a cure, was very, very bothersome for me.
Dr. Kataka comes up with a two-pronged treatment plan to deal with Cindy's inflammation and her overactive white blood cells.
The treatment for Cindy involved using 2 drugs, prednisone and cyclophosphamide. Prednisone is a very potent anti-inflammatory agent, and both prednisone and cyclophosphamide suppress her immune system.
Cyclophosphamide is also used in chemotherapy to kill cancer cells.
Chemo drugs are serious drugs. On top of it, that particular drug has some significant side effects. Dr. Kataka told me that it was necessary, that I had a pretty serious disease.
As long as Cindy is on the drug, her immune system will be suppressed, and she'll be vulnerable to infections. In addition, the cyclophosphamide itself is so strong, it could do damage to healthy parts of her body.
If the treatment didn't work, the worst case scenario is death. And there are other scenarios that could happen that I didn't like much better. You can lose your kidneys and have to have a kidney transplant.
Most of the time, we want to keep people on some medication for at least a year or 2. But we need to watch it very carefully during this time.
The good side was we have the diagnosis. There was the other side. What will the response be?
I prayed with all my might that the treatment would work, and I was hoping that I was going to be one of those people, one of the lucky ones.
Over the next 6 months, Cindy takes the potent combination of drugs every day.
Cindy had an excellent response to these medications. Within a relatively short period of time, her symptoms all gradually resolved as well.
He told me that I'd done extremely well, and he told me I was in remission.
Today, Carson is almost 6 years old and is slowly learning how to manage his disorder.
We've taught him that the kitchen is, a real dangerous area. When the oven's on, you stay away because that's a hot thing.
Each day presents new challenges, but the Colts are determined to keep their son safe.
When it's very cold outside, we need to make sure that he is bundled up because he gets really cold because his body doesn't regulate the temperature. When it's hot outside, we have a cooling vest for him.
We call it a superhero vest, and it has cooling packs that we put in the refrigerator.
Dina and Jeff have done a great job with Carson. They have become their own experts on SIPA. They know quite well how to manage things.
My wife gave up her job at the hospital and decided to stay home to make sure that, he could be watched, 24/7. Go that way. Go get it.
Carson's doing great. He is still such a happy boy.
He's going to be 6. Each year has gotten better and better. He's been able to do more and more things just because he has more and more understanding about what can happen and how things happen. You just move forward. You try to do the best you can for your kid. I just want my kid to be happy.
Today, Cindy has been in remission for more than 4 years.
My life has come full circle since all of this started.
Today, Cindy is the person that we used to know before she got sick.
Determined to make something positive out of her harrowing experience, Cindy has started a support group for people with her disease.
What I would say to people who are in a similar situation to I was, that are ailing, be your own advocate. Make those calls. It's all about you, and it's about saving your life and getting your health back into shape.